The 1960s and Whitney Young Jr. had the ear of presidents, and here you see President Lyndon B. Johnson listening to the civil rights champion, executive director of the National Urban League. And Young also negotiated with John F. Kennedy to create greater opportunities for black people. You're going to learn more about Young in a documentary being released, but today we're joined by his daughter, Young Casteel, who's known in Denver as a broadcaster for her work in city government and in philanthropy with the Hunt Alternatives Fund, the Buell Foundation, the Denver Foundation. Lauren has done a lot, and it's my pleasure to have her here as a friend. I'm so thrilled to have you here because I know you've never sought the spotlight of the fame of your father. So this is kind of a coming out to talk about him publicly, isn't it?
It very much so is for me, and I'm thrilled that I'm doing it with you because we do have such a long personal history. I'm thrilled to say I once produced you on Smith & Lynn.
That's right. I wasn't going to bring that up. But
since you're coming out now, too.
All right. Well, tell us about the documentary about your dad.
My cousin Bonnie, my first cousin, began this project, probably about 10 years ago, when she recognized that although she had had a personal relationship with my father as her uncle and the brother of her mother, that she didn't have as deep of an understanding of his legacy as she would have liked. Mm-hmm. And as her children were getting older, she wanted to be able to share that because her mother and our aunts were also aging. And my father died at a very young age.
Right. He died in an accident in Africa.
He drowned in Lagos, Nigeria when he was 49 years old in March of 1970.
So there's no telling what he might have done had he lived longer. But this is an interesting journey that he was on, and he was introduced to civil rights early in his life.
He was. My father was actually planning on being a medical doctor, and as fate would have it, he actually was not admitted into medical school, much to his surprise, I think. But he served in World War II as a part of a segregated troop of soldiers, and there were a number of conflicts that would arise between the white officers and the black troops. And because of my father's, I think, temperament, he was called in to mediate and navigate and advocate for the black soldiers and between those white officers. And at that point in time, I think the issue of social justice really rose in his mind. Here were troops who were giving their lives, serving their country, and who were not receiving equitable treatment within the armed services or even when they returned at home to Jim Crow laws.
Yeah, so many of us who are children of those soldiers can certainly relate to what you're talking about. Everybody knows that Martin Luther King was a famous person in the civil rights movement. What was your dad's role? Because it seems that all those leaders had different roles to play.
Each one of those leaders did, and they had great respect for each other and the roles that they played. My father was a part of what they called the Big Six of the civil rights movement, but that Big Six could be expanded. The six included, of course, Martin Luther King, Roy Wilkins with the NAACP, now Congressman John Lewis, James Farmer, and A. Philip Randolph. And people don't realize that A. Philip Randolph actually came up with the concept of the March on Washington, and that it was organized by an out gay man, Bayard Rustin. So in the context of history, there are many names who are not as well known, who were formidable in those events that we now see today.
Now, the film is being released. It coincides with Black History Month. Does the film, the documentary, seek to revitalize his legacy?
Well, I certainly hope so. That's why I'm standing here with you today with some personal discomfort. But I think that my father's story and the story of the larger civil rights movement is important. Within the film, there is discussion about the appreciation that Martin brought with him, the church, people. My father brought in the corporate sector. There were the youth of SNCC, and all of these voices, and even other louder voices, Stokely Carmichael and H. Rap Brown, played an important part in the dialogues. So in revitalization, I think it's important to recognize my father was a visionary. He had a vision that was known, really as an opportunity for us to serve people who had not otherwise been engaged. And that became the underpinning for Lyndon Johnson's war on poverty. It was known as the Domestic Marshall Plan.
And his influence, of course, is still being felt today. I was reminded recently, Lauren, that Our First Lady, Michelle Obama, went to Whitney Young High School. What do you think your dad would have thought of having an African American in the Oval Office?
I think he would be absolutely unequivocally thrilled. I think he recognized that that was a possibility. I don't think he would have been shocked. He was a strong believer in education, opportunity. He saw African Americans at the head of major corporations as ambassadors, as senators, and so I think he'd be thrilled. But I think he'd look at Whitney Young High School and say that's great that his name was on the building, but what was more important is what's happening within those schools, and that we have to address. Whitney Young High School is fabulously successful. It's a top school in Chicago, but there are too many schools where African American students are failing or dropping out and are undereducated or underemployed, and that hurts an entire community and an entire nation when those who have been marginalized or are vulnerable find themselves not receiving the equitable opportunities that he dreamed of.
Well, the film certainly gives us fuel for further discussion. Thank you so much, Lauren, for being here.
Thank you.
The movie's going to be screened privately this Sunday, and then we'll all be able to see it Monday on PBS, Channel 6. And if you'd like more information, the Powerbroker is called Whitney Young's Fight for Civil Rights, again on Rocky Mountain PBS Channel 6 at 9 p.m. on Monday. And I'm going to replay this segment, the interview that you and I just did, Lauren, on my Facebook page for those who may have missed it today. But right now we're going to